Well, for communities here in South Wales which have been devastated by Storm Dennis, there was more heavy rain today and in some areas more flooding to go with it. At least 1,000 properties across Wales have now been affected by the severe weather that's also left roads, bridges and other infrastructure needing repairs. Well, behind me here in Pontypridd, one of the streets that saw some of the most serious damage. And it's a picture repeated, of course, across South Wales and indeed other areas of Wales. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent, Andy Davies, is with me now. Andy, I've only been really wandering around here for the last 2 or 3 hours. You've been here, 2 or 3 days. What are you finding on the streets here in this area?
Well, we have been to quite a few places, and it is a pretty bleak picture out there. And what really strikes you is just how many small communities have been affected by this, such as the geography of the valleys here. And the task facing the council right now is mammoth. They've just put out a statement this evening saying they've got vehicles damaged, bridges that they have to repair. They've got that to contend with. They've also got hundreds of families they need to find accommodation if they haven't done so already. They're providing immediate hardship payments to each household of £500. And there is a huge amount of hardship out there that we've encountered. There is real desperation on the part of some people right now. Pleasant Street, Pentre in the Rhondda Valley, in the midst of recovering from Sunday's flood, and this morning it happens all over again.
Lots of people here have no insurance, they've lost absolutely everything, and I guess it's going to... I don't even know where we search for the money from.
Last night they were searching for answers in this village.
So who did you send up to clean check culverts?
Water happened to the pump, a juice bed, bloody thousands on, repairing.
Is there any finance going to come from Westminster?
Questions for other agencies perhaps, but this is one council among others under enormous strain.
I can tell you we give out thousands of sandbags, but we literally run the crews. We trebled the number of staff we had on duty. We brought pumps in from Bristol and further away. We've done everything we could ready, but we were just overwhelmed. It's as simple as that.
Staggering is how he describes the scale of the damage here. There are crisis meetings in village halls and day centres across these valleys.
They've asked for cleaning products.
They don't need food, right?
No, cleaning products.
In Pontypridd, we join some of the army of volunteers now making up food parcels, stacking boxes of cleaning products and children's clothes. And it's where we meet Kylie Robbins and her friend, exhausted, frightened and overwhelmed.
The river burst its banks up the road from my house in Porth, flooded all my house out, took my car with it, all my kids' toys. I took everything out of the house. There's nothing left in my house.
How are your children coping?
Not very well. My eldest is shut down, completely won't talk. My second youngest is waking up with nightmares.
We're fine. We'll get through it together, okay? Everywhere I can. Right.
In Rhondda Cynon Taf alone, it's estimated around 1,000 homes and businesses were flooded. You think livelihoods are at risk here, don't you?
Hundreds. I briefed the First Minister's office yesterday in the Welsh Government. We think that possibly as many as 300 to 400 jobs are currently at risk on one estate alone in the Treforest area, where the Nantgarw Treforest Industrial Estate was almost wiped out.
And if you needed any further illustration of just how much pressure this council is under right now, have a look at that mountainside. Another landslip discovered, just above the council headquarters. Not on the scale as the one in Tylerstown on Sunday, but the Welsh Government now wants Westminster involved in risk assessing other former colliery spoil tips. And if some streets get the political focus, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was in South Wales today, others feel forgotten, like here in the Cynon Valley by the Clydach, where the clock stopped at 2:30 a.m. on Sunday and the flood marks reached nearly 6 foot, leaving this woman's disabled sister dragging herself up the stairs to flee the flood. And out of this doorway, another neighbour having to swim to safety. What was the first thing you noticed when you got back in here?
The horrific smell, the sewage and
the horrible smell and the thick black sludge.
Rebecca Chadwick said it was 3 days before a council official came to offer support.
He came into the house and he said, "You're in a bit better condition than anybody else." And I said, "Yeah, because for 2 days solid, I have had my friends from school, because I'm a teacher in Cardiff, they have been up and supported me, and I wouldn't have done it without them. You know, I've got no help at all. My insurance, I pay for buildings and contents insurance. I've informed them that I live next door to a stream and they won't pay out because it was storm related." One person came down and she said to me, she knocked the door and she said, "Here's £80 for you because I know you've got nothing." I'm a proud person and people are coming up to me, giving me money. I never thought in a million years that I'd be having to do that.
The Welsh Government, which held an emergency summit yesterday, is providing £10 million of initial funding and calling on the Treasury for more. But of course it's not always about homes and businesses. In Llanbraddock it's about the hobby which Andrew Gale, a plumber, spent years nurturing for his sons.
Stand there, let me show Andy the rest of it.
His lovingly reared 60-strong prize-winning ducks and chickens.
Oh no.
Nearly all of them gone.
It's just devastating. They say it's a call of nature and things happen, don't they? But to see things like this it is heartbreaking, especially for the children. And the time and effort we put in, everybody in the allotment. She's gone, he's gone, she's gone, she's still here. At least we got the photographs and the memories, haven't we? With the shows and everything else. And we'll rebuild, won't we? Slowly, yeah.
And so the exhausting business of rebuilding begins. For so many communities, now struggling amidst the wreckage of that brutal weekend storm.
Well, Andy stays with me. One thing just in my few hours here, Andy, yes, you're talking to people about floods, but they very quickly weave in the fact that the industry has long since moved on. They talk about austerity. I guess it's easy to see why people feel that if they have a voice, it's not heard beyond these valleys, perhaps in the way that it should be.
Well, I think in the immediate sphere, they feel that they're being unheard because they can't, the council here, the politicians simply can't get round to all the different communities. And that's the point that I was making earlier. It is so vast that there are communities where the council have trebled the number of officers they've got out. They have put everything they've got out there, but they can't get round to these communities. Hence you'll find in that report, Clodagh Terrace, just down the road from here, where it took the council about 3 days to get to them. The Welsh Government is responding, but the Welsh Government is now asking for help, is asking for Westminster to hear the cries of help here. Now, whether they get the funding from the Treasury they say they need for the tens of millions of pounds of infrastructure repair, we don't know. We haven't heard from the UK government specifically on that, but there are a lot of issues now that need addressing in terms of the longer term damage, and it is going to cost a huge amount of money. And all the time we have people here who are saying, we're not worried about the infrastructure damage, we want to know how we're going to be fed and where our children are going to sleep tonight.
Thanks indeed, Andy. And that very much, I think, is going to be something we're going to be discussing with local politicians from the valleys areas in just a few minutes' time. But now let's move a little bit further north and indeed out of Wales. Across England, there remains what they're calling the threat of significant flooding as heavy rain continues to fall on already saturated ground. The Environment Agency has tonight warned of worsening conditions across parts of Yorkshire. But the fear of flooding also remains on the Welsh-English border. Our correspondent Claire Fallon is in Hampton Bishop near Hereford, a village cut off for several days following Storm Dennis. Claire.
Well, according to those leading the emergency response, we may now need to rethink all of the models for what unprecedented looks like. And that's because over the last couple of weeks, previous records have been broken, and because there is increasingly an acknowledgement that this will happen more and more and on a bigger scale. We are on the outskirts of the village here this evening because, frankly, unless you've got a 4x4 or a canoe, you can't go any further. It is right in between two rivers that still have severe flood warnings in place, and Storm Dennis dumped a huge amount of water on this area over the weekend. Earlier today, though, we did make it into the village, and here is what we found there.
It's gone down a little bit.
Gone down?
Yeah, it's gone down a few centimetres over the last 12 hours or so. Almost can get a 4x4 out of it. But if it rains in Wales, that's when we have a problem, because of course the rivers then overflow here. But just waiting for this to go down now. Hopefully it won't be too much longer.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Because it happens regularly. Loads of them got canoes, so a lot of them got canoes. Some of them moved their cars because they knew it was coming, so they moved their cars up above Mordyford. If you look on the radar, you can see that there's heavy rain coming. There's heavy rain across, all across Wales, right the way up to the north and up into Scotland. There's that band of rain, but well, you can't predict, can you? So.
Well, the firefighter we heard from there, who was going around in the village checking on people in their homes, he talked about the forecast of more rain over the coming days, and the Environment Agency is saying that there is a risk of significant flooding again in some places, not just here, but also up in areas across the Pennines, in areas of Yorkshire that have already been so badly affected over the last couple of weeks. And bear in mind, once the rain falls in the hills, it takes days to get to the rivers. So even when the rain stops, the risk does not end.
Claire Fallon, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining us now in Pontypridd is Mick Antoniou, Labour's Assembly member for Pontypridd, and Leanne Wood of Plaid Cymru. Thanks both for coming out into at least the dry, but it's pretty cold down here tonight. Something that I suspect you'll both agree on. Leanne, I'll ask you this first. As Andy Davis was saying, and he's painting a very graphic picture here, this is way beyond the reach of borough, county council, I dare say you'd say beyond the reach of the National Assembly here in Wales when it comes to the money that's needed. How do we cope financially, just getting the money that's needed into this disaster?
Well, the whole thing needs a complete rethink. It's not going to be enough just to patch things up for people now. We need to think about longer term planning. We know more of these weather events are coming. Climate change is telling us that. So we need to ensure that we can mitigate and prevent some of the flooding that we've seen has been preventable. You know, if you're talking about built up debris in culverts, that should have been cleared. So there's things you can do to prevent. And then there also needs to be packages of support in place for people to be able to rebuild their lives. So many people who've been affected don't even have insurance. That's unaffordable for people as things stand. It's going to become even more unaffordable in the future. So there needs to be some thought about just something like insurance. And that in itself is going to cost quite a lot of money, I would have thought.
Right. Mick Antoniou, the Leader of the Welsh Assembly, saying today we need tens of millions, but many more tens of millions. Treasury aren't going to give you a blank cheque.
Well, ultimately, if we're either going to deal with this as a UK as a whole, which means that the funding has to be put in. What we are facing, though, are unprecedented levels of weather. 2 storms within 1 week. The water's hit the highest level ever it has, a metre higher than has ever been recorded. And I think many people have told me that they've seen the river high, they've seen flooding before, but they've never seen anything on this scale. Now, it's £10 million coming from Welsh Government as a first step. There's money from the local council, but in the longer term, on a UK level, because there's flooding across the whole of England, Scotland, and in fact you look more broader globally, that there has to be a very, very substantial increase in the amount of money that is provided at UK level to across the UK to actually start looking at defences, flood defences that were perhaps prepared the 60s and 70s and 80s for a level of flooding that we have now exceeded beyond all expectations.
But people will be saying a pox on all your houses. I mean, climatologists, climate models have been warning for years and years and years of extreme rainfall events. Plaid weren't ready for it, Tories weren't ready for it, Labour weren't ready for it.
I think you're absolutely right that none of us saw this coming. None of us expected the level of flooding on this particular scale. And that's why our whole approach now, I think, has to change in terms of planning. I mean, in the valleys, we have limited scope because the valleys are a particular geography. Our towns are former mining towns that are based by rivers and so on. So we have to look at the older flood defences that were there and how we actually develop those. But we have to look at how we plan better.
There should have been an element of planning in this. We have been told for many years that climate change is coming. This is not a one-off. This is going to happen again. So we need to make sure things are in place. You know, there needs to be a return to the land reclamation grants that were available 5 years ago and that haven't been available since. Yes, there needs to be a reform of the Barnett formula. If we were funded according to need here in Wales, then we would be able to meet the needs of people.
Let me throw something into this. The people who've got the answer to this, in some senses, are the Tories, the Conservatives. They've got a new agriculture bill, before Parliament now, talking about natural management of flooding.
Well, you're absolutely right. But look,
the way to go.
The problem here is natural management of flooding is clearly something we have to look up in those areas when you can do it. But that is not something that applies in the valleys. We don't have floodplains here. We have steep sides. The water pours down. We have to have something.
We could clear culverts, couldn't we?
Of course we could.
We could do more. We can stop building on floodplains.
But look, the major thing is the scale of water coming down and the fact that the defences that we have at the moment aren't sufficient.
Right.
There are going to be many lessons we've got to learn.
Quick point on this. Not long ago, I was up in the northwest of Wales, Fairborn, talking about a whole town which might have to be moved because of rising sea levels, OK? The people were saying there's no strategy. Welsh Assembly can't afford this. Westminster don't know what to do about it. This is exactly the same thing. There's no strategy between our countries in these islands.
People are putting their fingers in their ears and trying to sing a very loud song, hoping that this will be put off into the future. It's not going to be put off into the future. It's happening now. Climate change is here, and we need to deal with it.
Final quick thought.
We have a wake-up call, and these events over the last couple of days are a wake-up call in dealing with climate change and the consequences of that.
And the scale of it.
And the scale.
Right. Thank you both very much indeed. Now go and get warm. Thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Well, this afternoon here in Pontypridd, I dropped in on a prominent environmental campaigner, currently not campaigning, but cleaning out his shop, wrecked, of course, by the floods here. It's a story of global politics, of the climate crisis, coming home in ways perhaps he could never have predicted.
Obviously, when I came in originally...
This is amazing. What, in 2 days or 2 or 3 days? This is amazing what you've achieved.
Yeah, no, it was like the whole place had been smashed up, basically. And it was about up to my waist, so what's that? 3.5 feet? 3 feet?
The Whole Food shop where Casper works has already come a long way since being inundated. But more food for thought were any more needed for a committed green campaigner.
You don't quite get the full extent of the damage of it until you actually see it yourself. People are struggling here already, and they're being hit by climate change disasters like this, which are going to get more and more frequent.
This is the banks of the Taff, not the banks of the Thames, right? It's a different economic bracket, right?
It is, but, it's going to reach the banks of the Thames as well at some point, but we don't... We need to, it's an emergency and people need to recognise that.
He wanted to show me more of what Pontypridd has become.
A lot of businesses just survive, they just get by, and maybe enough to pay a wage, maybe a low wage. And, then they're going to maybe be able to claim some insurance, but a lot of them, that'll be the end.
Round the corner, the Welsh Language Club run by volunteers like Justin.
Well, I was actually here when it started flooding, so within 20 minutes the entire courtyard was full of water and it was already seeping through the door, and I was like, oh guys, we might as well go home, let's move.
Last orders, right?
Yeah, last orders.
Inside, the water here was 5 feet deep. Repeated floods mean no insurance on these premises. So mixed emotions for exhausted volunteers like Jane Rees, the heartbreak of seeing so much so ruined all over again, but the enduring support of people from the valleys and beyond.
The club has come back after floods before, but I must say we're really grateful for all the volunteers who have come and helped us out. People not only from Pontypridd area, but from Cardiff, Merthyr, Bridgend. Probably about 80 people over the last couple of days have turned up.
80?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yes, and people with buckets and mops and, anything they could do.
Out back, the Taff, still raging in spate, but contained until the next time.
And that's it from Pontypridd. Back now to Jackie in the studio.